I was smoothing a sheet of parchment over a cooling rack when my son said, "Mom, I don't think you should come on the cruise." The tart I'd baked, a glossy apricot, one his favorite since Little League, looked indecently cheerful beside the sink. Sun spilled through Daniel's kitchen like it didn't know any better. Serena was wiping fingerprints from a stainless steel fridge, the citrus cleaner too bright in the air. "Pardon," I asked, even though I'd heard him perfectly. "The timing," Daniel said, not looking at me. "We want this to be just us. Me, Serena, the kids, to focus." Serena gave a small, apologetic smile that never reached her eyes. "It's about establishing our family rhythm," she said. "You know, consistency." "I didn't realize I was inconsistent," I said, setting the tart on the counter before my hands could betray me. The calendar on their wall was a grid of order school concerts and blue appointments and green family time blocked in red like a warning label. Daniel's spoon clinked against a mug. "It's not that. We just thought. You thought I shouldn't come." He closed his eyes for half a second. "We'll plan something else, Mom. Another trip. Soon." 10 years ago, my husband Thomas had asked me to promise him something simple, just a place. He'd unutterably polite even then. "Go to the islands with the white roofs," he'd whispered, hand warm in mine. "Stand there and remember me." It was a small request in a large silence. I'd said yes. After the funeral, Daniel had told me he'd take me. Life was thick then. There were lawyers and casseroles and a house that suddenly made too much echo. He'd repeated the promise every year without me asking. Then came his firm, a divorce, a new life, a new wife. We saved the brochures in a drawer Santorini circled in ink. Somehow the years kept happening, one careful compromise at a time. Now, 1 week before departure, my son was telling me I would be a distraction. "I understand," I said, though I didn't. The apricot tart shone like a stage prop. "I'll let you enjoy your vacation." The drive home was a smear of streetlights. At a red signal, I realized I'd been holding my breath since he'd spoken. That night, I put water on for tea and watched it forget to boil. The house made its familiar noises, the fridge settling, the clock sighing through each minute. I imagined the Aegean as Thomas had once described it, from a book, blue like enamel, blue like certainty. The kettle finally rattled. I didn't drink the tea. The phone rang near 10. "Marion, it's Hannah." She hadn't called me late like that since Zoe had pneumonia at 3. Everyone had gotten well after that, and our friendship had stubbornly refused to follow the rule book divorced families are handed. "Everything all right?" I asked. "The kids are fine," she said. "I'm not." A breath. "Zoe told me Daniel uninvited you." I pressed my palm to the cool tile. "He did." "It's absurd," Hannah said, heat rising in her voice. "You've had the brochures pinned to your corkboard since, you know." I closed my eyes. "He says they need to establish a rhythm." "Like you're a cymbal crash," she muttered. Then in a more measured tone, "Can you have lunch with me tomorrow? La Verona at noon." "Hannah, I have something to show you," she said. "Please." La Verona was busy in the midday way of places with good gnocchi. Hannah sat in a corner booth with a leather folio and a look I recognized from parent-teacher meetings, a plan. "I didn't order," she said, standing to hug me. "I wasn't sure what you were eating these days." "Food," I said, and tried to smile. She slid a contract from the folio paper, heavy and official. "I got an advance," she said, tapping the masthead of a publishing house. "They're buying my literacy curriculum. I've been piloting it with my third graders. Remember those Saturday mornings with the card catalog game? Someone noticed. There's a grant for classroom expansion," and she flipped a page, "a personal honorarium." "That's wonderful," I said. "You've earned that 5 times over." She gave me the look that means don't deflect. "I booked a suite on the Aegean Majesty," she said. "The Orion Suite. It has a ridiculous balcony and a person called a concierge who says things like, 'We'll take care of that.' I would like you to be my guest." My mouth opened and then didn't. I thought of Thomas's penciled circle around an island name we could never pronounce. Hannah kept going as if I might bolt. "Before you say no, this is not a stunt. It's a trip I want and a trip you promised. The ship sails in 6 days and there are 3,000 people on it. We won't be in your son's pocket. We'll have our own dining room, our own door to close. If Serena wants distance, she can have the whole ocean." It feels confrontational. "It feels like a door you've been standing beside for a decade," she said. "It's unlocked." I laughed, a small surprised sound. "This is extravagant." "It's precise," she countered, then softened. "Let me do this. Not because you're owed, though you are, but because I want the kids' grandmother on the same blue sea as their mother. I want them to see what belonging looks like when it's generous." I checked the date at the top of her contract to avoid crying in a restaurant. "You're sure?" "Yes." "What if Daniel—" I started. "Daniel will survive an awkward surprise," she said. "Zoe and Max have survived plenty." We talked until the waiter began stacking chairs around us. On the sidewalk, the air smelled like distant rain and basil. "All right," I said. "All right. All." The week moved with an efficiency I didn't know I possessed anymore. I found my passport where Thomas had taught me to keep it inside the atlas under Italy, inside a manila envelope labeled with my maiden name in his careful block letters. I folded clothes that felt like permission linen with some ease to its sandals that could be trusted on stairs. When the car Hannah had arranged came, it was glossy and absurd. The driver introduced himself as Leon and did not flinch when I told him to take the tart too. At the port, the Aegean majesty looked like a white city pretending to be a ship. Hannah stood by the curb in a cream jacket that did for her what caffeine does for mortals. Beside her, a young woman held an iPad and a smile. "Ms. Clark, Ms. Finch," the woman asked. "Welcome, I'm Mira. If you'll follow me, Orion guests are checked in through the Horizon Lounge." The terminal was a hive. Lines wound around stanchions. People consulted clipboards like weather. We were led past it up a quiet staircase to a glass-walled room with low chairs and a tray of peaches that tasted when I tried one like August had been distilled. Mira handled our passports and returned them in minutes. "You can relax here until boarding," she said. "There's sparkling water and espresso or anything you'd like, really." She slipped away. Hannah exhaled. "Say it," she murmured. "Say this is ridiculous so we can both agree and then enjoy it anyway." "It's unusual," I said, smiling properly for the first time that week. Beyond the glass, the general terminal roiled. People craned to see each other. I felt a tug at my ribs I hadn't earned in years' anticipation. "Do you think they're here yet?" I asked before I could stop myself. Hannah didn't pretend not to know who they were. "Probably," she said. "There's no way Serena would leave seating to chance." I nodded. The room made hurry up feel like a language I couldn't speak anymore. A pianist in the corner began something economical and lovely. I found myself remembering small, ordinary things about Thomas. The way he made toast, how he never lost socks, how he would have adjusted his camera strap in a place like this and said something about vanishing points. The day after his diagnosis, he had printed a photo of blue roofs and taped it to the microwave, because that's where he knew I'd glance when my mind was elsewhere. For aim, he'd said. Mira returned with boarding cards the color of cardinals. "When you're ready," she said, "Orion and Zenith guests can pre-board through that entrance." I held the red card. It felt like cardboard and also like something else. Hannah squeezed my hand. "We'll be good," she said. "We'll be fine." Noise surged at the far end of the glass as a new wave of passengers flowed in. My gaze snagged on two familiar heads, one dark and braided, one with a cowlick that had resisted gel since kindergarten. Zoe saw me first. She stopped so abruptly that a man behind her bumped her shoulder. Her mouth formed an O and then a question. She looked at Hannah, then at me again, then flung her hand in the air as if to test reality. Max slower and then faster followed her line of sight. His face did that open thing children's faces do when they forget to protect themselves. He lifted both arms as if he were about to climb a fence. Two adults, my son and his wife, appeared behind them, wrestling with carry-ons and a clipboard. Daniel's eyes swept the chaos, then found mine through the glass. I saw confusion arrive and then recognition. Serena froze. Her smile slid into its bones and stayed there, all geometry, no warmth. An attendant at the Horizon Lounge door began to explain something to the children. The glass made it theater. Zoe pointed, protesting softly. Max put his palm against the pane and left a print. "Max." Hannah stood. "Mira," she said calmly, "they're with us." The attendant looked to our concierge. Mira turned to me. "Would you like me to invite them and Ms. Clark?" I took one measured breath and nodded. The door clicked. The children took 3 steps into the room, bringing the noise of the terminal with them like weather, and stopped directly in front of me, sunlight flash-firing in their hair, eyes bright with relief that needed no words at all. Zoe stopped inches from my knees, breathless. Max hovered at her shoulder, all elbows and hope. Up close, they smelled like sunblock and peppermint. Behind them, the lounge door was still closing, cushioning the terminal's clamor into a soft aquarium hum. "Grandma, are you coming?" Zoe asked, not trusting her own deduction. "I am," I said. The answer settled something under my ribs. Hannah bent to kiss their hair. "Hi, you two." The attendant glanced toward the glass again. Daniel and Serena were at the stanchions, now speaking to a staffer who pointed toward the Horizon Lounge and then to a different counter. Serena's smile had the taut curve of a bowstring. Mira reappeared with red boarding cards. "If you'd like to say a quick hello," she murmured, "we'll begin priority boarding in 2 minutes." Zoe's hand found mine the way it had when she learned to cross streets. Max pointed at my card. "Why is yours a different color?" "Because I'm old and easily lost," I said. It made him snort. The lounge door opened again. Daniel stepped inside first, coat over his arm, eyes doing the math. Serena followed, poised so deliberate it creaked. "Mom," Daniel said, stopping short at the sight of the pianist, the peaches, the carpet with constellations woven into it. "Hannah." "Daniel." Hannah's voice was mild, cordial in the way polite citizens address traffic officers. "What a surprise," Serena said. She wasn't surprised. "Mira saved us. We're beginning boarding for Orion and Zenith," she said brightly. "If you'll excuse us." Zoe squeezed me hard enough to bruise and hopped back to her family. Max mimed zipping his mouth, then grinned and unzipped it again. "See you on board," I told them. I kept my tone light. Daniel opened his mouth and then closed it as if words couldn't arrange themselves fast enough to be useful. We followed Mira through a quiet hallway to a separate gangway. The ship's flank rose like a white cliff beside us, windows blinking with reflected water. A photographer asked if we wanted a picture. We declined. There was enough documentation in my head. Inside the Aegean Majesty was a cathedral to soft lighting and resolved logistics. Surfaces gleamed. People in navy blazers walked as if the floor had rehearsed with them. Our elevator released us into a space made mostly of horizon glass and sea, and the sound of someone laughing a deck below. The Orion suite was larger than my first house. A bowl of figs sat on a table of pale wood. The carpet yielded like memory foam. A pair of sliding doors opened onto a balcony wide enough for actual walking. Out there, the harbor curled around us, cranes like folded insects at its edge. A man in a charcoal vest appeared as if unfurling from the woodwork. "Welcome," he said. "I'm Raphael, here to assist with anything you need." He showed us the espresso machine and the panel that controlled lights with names like Sunset and Stargaze. When he left, the door's soft hush fell like punctuation. Hannah stood in the doorway to the second bedroom, assessing. "If the children come by, they'll touch everything and then ask what this costs." "They'll ask you," I said. I planned to feign ignorance. I was unzipping my suitcase when Raphael returned with a tray of iced water and 2 envelopes. "Compliments of the hotel director," he said. "And your dining confirmations. Orion guests have a table at Celestia each evening unless you prefer elsewhere." "Does elsewhere include nowhere?" I asked. He smiled without judging. "Room service is very good." We'd barely set our passports in the safe when the door chimed again. "Daniel." He looked handsome in the weary way that suggests the handsomeness came second. Serena stood slightly behind him, jacket folded over her arm like armor. "May we come in?" Daniel asked, already half in. Raphael slid out, invisible and efficient. "This is a lot," Daniel said, taking in the view. "Mom, you should have told me." "You should have told me," I said, keeping my voice even. 6 days ago." Color rose into his collar. Serena stepped forward, her smile calibrated for press photos. "We want to avoid mixed messages for the children," she said. "We designed this week to build our family unit, as opposed to what Hannah asked. The family they already have." Serena didn't blink. "Structure matters." "So does choice," I said. "The two aren't enemies." Daniel lifted a hand as if conducting. "All right. Logistics. We're in a family ocean view on deck 6. You're here." He gestured to our space like someone referencing a mountain range. "There's plenty of room for separate plans. We can coordinate so the kids aren't ping-ponging. Or," I said, "we can ask them what they want day by day. They're 14 and 12, not potted plants." "They're still children," Serena said. "Consistency is safety." "They're still children," Hannah echoed softer. "Which includes letting them express preference without paying a price for it." Daniel rubbed his forehead. He'd done that when fractions first appeared. "Let's not do this in the first hour," he said. "We'll be civil. We'll keep the kids out of any tension." "Excellent," Hannah said. "Then we're done." Serena looked as if Hannah had offered her a live snake. "We have the safety drill," she said, and pivoted for the door. After the drill, Orange Life vests 1,000 people learning the geography of exits. At once, we let the elevators carry us up to Celestia. A wall of windows turned the water the color of poured tin. The tables were widely spaced, the chairs upholstered in the way that forgives posture. "Welcome, Ms. Clark," said the maitre d', consulting his tablet. "Miss Finch, we've reserved table 8 for you for the voyage." "That seems optimistic," I said. He smiled. Everyone on this ship knew how to smile as if optimism were their wage. We ordered like people who suspect the kitchen knows secrets. Somewhere after the first course, the sun slipped behind the cranes and the harbor traded mat for mirror. We ate slowly, talking about anything that stuck Hannah's third graders the way Zoe reads at the bus stop with her foot on the curb. Max's new habit of sleeping with a flashlight under his pillow so he can check that the world is still where he left it if he wakes up at 3. When we wandered after dinner, we found the ship in festival mode, string lights looping over a promenade deck, bartenders twirling metal shakers and small contained circuses. At the gelato counter, 2 familiar heads hovered over a sample spoon. Daniel stood beside them, hands in pockets attempting casual. Serena was nowhere. "Pistachio," Max said, urgent. "Grandma, try the pistachio." I did. Tastes like a respectable treat. Zoe laughed with her whole face. Daniel offered a smile that apologized for more than gelato. "Evening." "Evening," Hannah said. "Serena?" I asked, because pretending not to notice absence felt worse. "Not feeling great," he said. "Motion." It would have been plausible if the water weren't the placid kind that makes photographers lazy. Zoe tipped her head toward me, making her hair swing in its braid. "Can we have breakfast with you?" "Celestia has breakfast for Orion guests," I said. "Or we can find the buffet and pretend to be pirates." Daniel cleared his throat. "Let's start in the Ocean View Cafe. It's Less formal. Less formal is code for more crowded, Hannah murmured. I kicked her under the counter gently. Zoe didn't care where she ate. She cared who she was sitting next to. 8, she asked. We'll be early. 8, I said. Daniel nodded too quickly as if assent could outrun hesitation. The ship slipped away from the pier that night without drama. In bed, I lay awake and watched the curtains exhale with the ship's breathing. Somewhere beyond the glass, a city shrank and the sea arranged itself. The Ocean View Cafe was a market of breakfast stations for omelets and porridge fruit cut into obedient cubes, croissants glossy as lacquered boats. Zoe and Max found us with plates that suggested their future dentist would buy a second vacation home. Daniel appeared moments later, hair damp, shoulders burdened with an intent to keep things easy. Serena joined, eyes bright in a way that wasn't joy. She wore a sundress printed with lemon trees and a concentrate of determination. We're headed to the family pool after this, she announced. They have structured games this morning. Max's mouth elongated into a line. We were going to the big pool with the slide. We talked about it, Zoe said. Serena's smile thinned. Plans change, honey. Do they? Hannah asked, peeling an orange as if it were a debate prop. Daniel set down his coffee. Let's not. The announcement system rescued us by announcing nothing that mattered. I took a slow bite of toast and looked at the kids. We're at the arcade at 3, I said to no one in particular. If any ship-dwelling persons happened by. Zoe's eyes flicked to Hannah, then back to me. A tiny nod. Serena pretended to examine a bowl of melon. They left for the family pool, Serena shepherding with soft touches that were not optional. Hannah and I attended a talk about Mediterranean architecture in a lounge where every seat had a footrest. I learned nothing except that people love models on turntables. We drifted through a photography exhibit, and I paused too long at a black and white study of the Vatican's Bramante staircase, the spiral captured like a question you can live with. At 3, the arcade was an excited cave of lights. Zoe and Max were already there, cheeks high with color, Daniel on a bench, scrolling through work emails while pretending not to. Hannah placed a crisp bill on the counter and said, "The kind that buys a bucket of tokens, please." The next hour belonged to laughter. Max showed me how to steer a virtual car that didn't deserve me. Zoe pulled Hannah onto a dance platform and demolished her with kindness. Daniel allowed himself to be conscripted into a basketball shooting game, dressed shoes squeaking on the carpet as he rediscovered how to miss and then how not to. Serena found us with the look of someone who has mislaid a plan. "There you are," she said brightly. "Daniel, our couple's massage is at 4. Daniel frowned. "We don't, did we?" "It's a surprise," she said. "Come." Max's face fell as if someone had pulled a string. "Can we stay with Grandma?" Serena tilted her head. "You have the teen club orientation." "We don't," Zoe said levelly. Hannah leaned an elbow on a skee-ball machine. "We've been invited to a gelato social on the observation deck at sunset, complimentary and weather permitting." She said it like an affidavit. Max gasped. "On the windy part, with the view all the way." Serena's smile had new geometry. "The teen club has a movie night." Daniel hesitated, balancing in an hour against a week and finding the hour heavier. "If they want to go with their grandmother and mother for gelato," he said almost to himself, "what's the harm?" Serena's eyes said the harm was obvious to anyone willing to see it. She turned. "We'll be late." Daniel mouthed, "I'll text," and followed. On the observation deck at dusk, the wind rearranged our hair and opinions. Crew members and windbreakers manned a long table where gelato tubs were nestled in crushed ice as if awaiting christening. The sea wore metallic shoulders, the sky reddened dutifully. Max pressed his face to the glass barrier and whispered numbers as if cataloging shades. Zoe found the one patch of calm and ate her cone like a grown-up with concentration and grace. "Thank you," Daniel said later, arriving alone with his tie removed and his expression unfastened. He meant the gelato and not just the gelato. We let the wind do most of the talking. When the first star appeared, Max pointed it out as if he'd invented it. The first Port Civitavecchia asked us to disembark at an hour that felt borrowed. Our balcony faced a pale smear of sky that would be Italy if you let it. A text arrived from Daniel. "Kids are begging to join your Vatican thing. Can that happen?" Hannah laughed softly when I showed her the phone. "Victory by paperwork," she said. She had booked early entry months ago by writing letters to a program whose acronym sounded like a minor constellation. "Tell him to meet us at the Priority Lounge at 8. They came in neat clothes and hopeful faces. Daniel delivered them with the caution of someone handing over heirlooms. "You're sure?" he asked. Eyes flicking toward a tour bus outside where a guide held a sign above her head like pennants. "We're doing the Highlights tour." "Highlights are a form of grief," Hannah said. "We'll return them fed and full of opinions." Rome unscrolled in blocks of light and noise. Our guide, a woman named Sylvia, whose voice contained a century of marble dust, took us to a side door of the Vatican museums, where a badge and a kind remark parted what would later be an ocean of people. Inside, the quiet held like breath. We moved through rooms where color had learned to behave. Sylvia pitched her explanations at the children without condescension. Zoe asked about pigment, about ultramarine, and how much it cost to make the sky. Max stared so hard at a map of the known world that his mouth opened a little. In the Sistine Chapel, we sat along a bench, hands in our laps, necks craned with intent. A guard's hush rolled the length of the room and back a human tide. "It looks like light." "But it's paint," Zoe whispered. Thomas had said that once in a museum in Chicago, standing in front of a Rembrandt, he made light with dirt. I didn't think about that. I thought about nothing and everything and the peculiar relief of finally standing where a promise had pointed, even if this was not that promised island, even if that part of the promise was not mine alone to keep. We ate at a trattoria where the owner called Max Picasso after Max stole the paper tablecloth to keep his drawing of a spiral staircase from being bussed away. Sylvia wrote down the name of a bookstore for Zoe and then added directions to an out-of-the-way courtyard where she said the light behaved like an apology. When we returned to the port, the highlights buses were letting out their quiet wilted pilgrims. Daniel waited just past the security checkpoint alone. He hugged the children and listened, one hand on each of their shoulders as their sentences collided. His face did a small private thing when Zoe mentioned the chapel. "Thanks," he said to us and meant it. "We'll see you later." That night, the main theater staged a show that looked like every cruise poster's dream sequence. Hydraulic platforms, a medley that managed to include both Sinatra and a song from a cartoon about a princess who refused to freeze. The usher waved us to our reserved seats down front. 2 minutes later, Zoe and Max slid in beside us, breathless. Daniel and Serena took seats 5 rows behind. I knew without turning. Zoe laughed at the wrong places in the way of people who delight in craft more than plot. Max watched the drummer who did not smile because his hands were telling a story already. When the curtain fell, 1,000 hands made a sound like rain on roofs. Max turned to me, face shining. "Best vacation," he said, then clapped again because clapping was safe. In the aisle, the 4 of us collected ourselves. Daniel approached, jacket over his arm. Serena walked 2 paces ahead as if the carpet asked for it. "Did you enjoy it?" Daniel asked, meaning the evening and the day that preceded it. "We did," I said. Zoe touched my wrist. "Breakfast." "Breakfast," I said. "Ate." Back in the suite, the wind pressed its palm to the glass. The ship hummed engine's air through ducts, other people breathing through walls. I brushed my teeth and set my watch on the nightstand and stood for a long while with the balcony door cracked, cool air, rinsing the room of theater glitter and Rome's incense and whatever else we'd brought back without names. At dawn, the sea had traded black for blue. The schedule on the coffee table said Sea Day in small, law-abiding letters. Somewhere deep in the ship, bakers were pulling bread from ovens. The scent found us as reliably as tide. I dressed, set the red boarding card on the table as if it could hold the room together in my absence, and reached for the handle. The day waited, unopinionated and large, and the ship moved forward because that is its job. Sea spread out in all directions like a calm, deliberate thought. The schedule on our coffee table said Sea Day and then kept its opinions to itself. By mid-morning, Hannah and I had drifted through a lecture about olive cultivation, tasted 3 versions of the same oil, and argued amiably about bitterness versus bite. When we returned to the suite, a card waited on the console. Culinary Studio, 2:00 p.m., Mediterranean Classics, Orion Guess, complimentary. Someone had penciled a smiley face beside complimentary. The ship had a sense of humor. A text pinged. "Daniel, the kids want to do your cooking thing." Possible I pictured Serena's face when she learned that sauce and choice could coexist. "Tell him yes," Hannah said, already tying her hair back the way she did when flour was likely. At 2, the Culinary Studio gleamed like intention steel and light in a long marble island. The executive chef introduced himself as Gianni and snapped on a mic with the showman's grace that makes recipes look like stories. He split us into stations. Zoe claimed the egg yolks like treasure. Max volunteered to grate pecorino and then discovered respect for a triangle of cheese. "Carbonara is about restraint," Gianni said, tapping a whisk against a bowl. "Heat but off the flame, motion but not panic." He let Max crack pepper until the air smelled like a decision. Daniel hovered at this doorway for a moment, the posture of a man taking the temperature of a room he didn't entirely understand, then slipped inside and leaned against the back wall. He watched his children with an expression I recognized from school concerts, before applause, the one that says, "Don't mess this up. It matters to someone small." By the time we slid strands of pasta through the gloss of eggs and cheese and pepper, Zoe was grinning like the girl who had taught herself a complicated braid in a mirror, and Max had asked 3 follow-ups about carryover heat. We plated, we tasted, we hoarded small victories in shallow bowls. Afterward, Gianni handed the kids parchment sleeves with their names embossed on top. "Come back tomorrow," he said. "We'll make tiramisu. You can argue about cocoa powder placement." As we left, Daniel fell into step with us. "Dinner together tonight," he said, almost formal. "Celestia at 7. It's time we sat at one table." Hannah nodded. I studied his face and saw something unlatched behind the eyes. Celestia was all glass and candlelight in the hush of engineered civility. The maitre d' greeted us as if we'd practiced and seated us at a long table that made positioning an act of diplomacy. Zoe and Max took the center like buffers. Daniel sat across from me. Serena arrived last, smoothed her lemon-printed dress, and lowered herself into a chair as if it had applied for the privilege. Menus opened closed. Starters arrived. The conversation obeyed traffic laws. The children narrated Gianni's rules for timing. Daniel listened smiling with the carefulness of someone standing among tripwires. Serena contributed occasionally, every sentence sanded. It shifted when Zoe mentioned the next port, as if naming weather. Tomorrow we're going to do the photography tour with Mom's friend, she said, bright with anticipation. He has secret spots for light in the alleys. Daniel's fork paused over the plate. Serena set down her water glass with deliberate precision. We have a family excursion booked, she said. Akrotiri. The word landed like an index finger. Zoe's voice stayed respectful. We told Dad we wanted the photo walk. He said okay. All the candled quiet in Celestia concentrated. Daniel looked at me and then at Hannah and then at Serena as if fairness were a geometry problem with too many diagonals. Serena smiled, but the smile had steel threads. So I'm to spend the day exploring Bronze Age ruins with my husband while his children wander with his mother and his ex-wife. They won't be wandering, Hannah said. They'll be learning how to see. Is that what we're calling it? The tone was light. The edges were not. This week has been a steady erosion of boundaries. I am the one left to clean up sentiment. Serena, Daniel said softly, warning woven into his voice. She turned to him. You agreed to a plan. I agreed to keep the week from breaking. He spoke evenly, like balancing something fragile on a palm. The kids asked for this. I don't see the harm. The harm, she said, is in the precedent. Every no becomes negotiable if the right audience is watching. The plates arrived like a rescue that didn't know what kind it was. Our server placed the fish, the lamb, the vegetarian thing that looked more ambitious than it tasted. Max stared at his fork. Zoe stared at a candle. Daniel inhaled as if oxygen had to be invited. I set my knife down. The children don't need the weight of adult accounting, I said. No tremor. No apology. Serena's eyes, very bright now, came to me. And you don't need to insert yourself into decisions that aren't yours, she said. You have done quite enough inserting. Hannah didn't raise her voice. We are seated at a table with two children trying to make themselves invisible. Perhaps we can at least move the conversation into sentences they can carry. Daniel pushed his chair back slightly and then slipped it forward again, a useless motion that sounded like restraint. He looked at Zoe and Max, then at Serena, then back to the children. We'll honor the photo tour, he said, voice level. We can adjust. Serena's napkin landed beside her plate like a soft verdict. Enjoy your dinner. She stood, every line of her controlled. I find I've lost my appetite. She left the way people leave when the air has ended. The table exhaled very slowly. They, okay, Max asked, not moving his eyes from the butter knife he'd begun to line up with a stripe in the tablecloth. They will be, Daniel said, and it sounded like a promise he was making to himself. We ate what we could. The room softened around us and then returned to normal. Other tables were already at dessert, a couple in a corner saying something funny with their hands. After coffee, the kids kissed our cheeks and followed their father toward the elevators. Zoe looked back once and gave a small tilt of the chin that, in our borrowed language, meant still here. Morning lit the Orion balcony in a color that made Sicily look like it had stepped forward. Mount Etna held itself on the horizon, large and not theatrical. Raphael set down a tray of fruit and left a folded note. Mr. Hale in corridor wishes to speak with you, Ms. Clark. Daniel stood in the doorway as if entering a chapel. He had shaved. His eyes had not slept. I owe you an apology, he said without preface. Several, probably. Sit, Hannah said, pouring coffee. Start with the one that unclenches your shoulders. He sat. Last night wasn't about a museum versus a camera lens. Serena and I have been tugging on opposite ends of the same thing for months. We said some of it out loud after dinner. More than we've managed to say in a very long time. I waited. She told me things I should have learned earlier, he said. Her stepfather treated love like a ledger. Her place at the table depended on keeping quiet and keeping small. She learned to make schedules the way other kids learn to make forts. It felt safe. Hannah nodded once, not endorsement, not dismissal. She's agreed to talk to someone, he said. And so will I. We'll figure out the rest after. I let air move in and out, and today I asked, practical, not test. She's at the spa, he said. She needs quiet. The kids are with the youth staff until we meet you on shore. He stood then, and for a second he looked like the boy who had brought me half-melted popsicles on August porches. Mom, he said, and the word cleared something in the room. I'm sorry. About the phone call in my kitchen. About the years I let drift. About not keeping a promise that had a name and a location. I nodded. The apology had weight. It landed where it should. Downstairs, the Priority Lounge hummed with its own efficient weather. Zoe arrived in a sundress the color of Clean Sky Max in a shirt he would definitely stain. They were electric with the prospect of streets they hadn't met. Daniel checked them and signed, something reminded no one to behave, and watched as we were released into the small choreography of disembarkation. Taormina climbed the hillside as if refusing to be anywhere else. We took a shuttle that wound itself into the town, then followed narrow lanes where bougainvillea draped itself like shoulder scarves. An old theater opened onto a view that rearranged the idea of distances. Zoe stood at its edge and let the wind draft her hair backward. Max counted arches and then lost his place and had to start again. We lunched on a terrace with a line of blue beyond it pretending to be infinite. A server set down plates with the satisfaction of a man who had watched tourists forget time all summer. Zoe photographed shadows under table legs. Max discovered that fennel tastes like a plant with confidence and declared it fine in the salad and nowhere else. Hannah showed me a short, grainy video from the cooking class of yesterday, Max's hands whisking air into yolks while Johnny narrated like a sportscaster. On the walk back toward the shuttle stop, bells from a small church counted the hour with the measured patience of stone. In the piazza, a trio played something with a clarinet that made even passers-by hold their breathing differently. Daniel texted back on board later. "Kids with you until 4, I typed yes and slipped the phone away." The afternoon leaned warm. Stairs led down, turns led sideways. A cat moved with the proprietary ease of a local. We reached the overlook where the town pretends to be a balcony for the sea. Zoe angled her phone. Max announced that if you stared long enough, boats became punctuation. We stood there until standing felt complete and then turned toward the buses, the sun tilting the day, settling into the sort of tired that means you've actually been somewhere. Dawn rinsed the windows clean. The Aegean majesty moved through a bowl of light, the caldera widening ahead until it felt like the sea had opened its hand. White buildings climbed the black cliffs in tiers, blue domes bright as enamel pins. On the balcony, Zoe leaned into the rail. Max steadied a pair of borrowed binoculars with ceremony. "Those rooftops look like they're holding their breath," Zoe said. Hannah raised her camera. "Let's go meet them." Disembarkation was a string of small boats, stitching themselves toward the island. At the tender dock, a man with a sun-creased face and a camera bag introduced himself as Nikos. "We chase light," he said, tapping his watch. "It runs faster than people." He led us up stone steps that threw back heat even in morning, then into lanes narrow enough to teach you where to put your shoulders. The air was white with glare until we turned and it wasn't courtyard shaded by bougainvillea. A cat asleep on a doorstep with one ear listening for fame, the sea suddenly framed in an arch like a held breath. Nico spoke to the children as if they were nephews he'd promised to entertain and educate. "You think in thirds," he said, showing Max the rule on the back screen. "You wait for someone to walk into the frame so the picture has a heartbeat." He showed Zoe how to read the bright exposé for the whites so they don't lie to you. She dialed the compensation and watched the blue deepen into truth. We found a terrace no larger than a rug, where the island stepped aside to make room for water and sky. Nikos explained backlighting and silhouettes. Zoe asked him to hold her phone while she adjusted a timer, then propped it against a pot of rosemary. "Stand there," she told us, placing us against the light, Hannah and me, with our shoulders almost touching Max in front, because that's where 12 belongs, the curve of the caldera, behind like a mapped thought. The shutter counted down. The picture was simple. It knew what it was doing. Farther along the streets grew busy with day trippers in straw hats, each corner an exercise in patience. Nikos took us sideways to a church courtyard where a bell hung in a small white arch, its rope coiled like a vow. He had Zoe meet her for the shadows, then step back. In the finished frame, the bell hovered like a punctuation mark that means pay attention. "Hungry?" he asked when the sun began crowding the pavements. We ate at a taverna that faced nothing but air and a slope and blue. A server brought tomatoes that tasted like a decision and a basket of bread that gave way without argument. Hannah ordered coffee strong enough to conduct a rehearsal. Zoe experimented with olives and discovered opinions. Max pressed a napkin flat and sketched the shoreline in graphite, then added arrows as if explaining wind to himself. After lunch, Nikos walked us through a short tunnel that delivered us to a view with a new angle, the kind that feels undeserved. "This is where wedding photographers bring their hopes," he said. 2 more stops, and then the tender will start behaving like a queue. On the last overlook, I asked him to give us a minute. He nodded and moved away with the discretion of someone who knows when a photograph is not the thing being taken. I stood at the low wall and let my hands rest there, palms warmed by the stone. A breeze found the place between collar and skin. The domes were very blue. The sea was many blues pretending to be one. The roofs, the alleys, the sun on plaster, all of it held a plainness that didn't need translating. "Thomas," I said under the wind. The word arrived without ceremony. I didn't try to manufacture anything larger than the view. The promise had been a sentence with a verb and an object. I had carried it across 10 years that accented everything. Now the sentence was complete. When I turned back, Zoe was watching me the way teenagers sometimes do when they forget to protect themselves. She put her hand on my arm. It was the lightest touch, as if she had placed a bookmark there and expected to find it later. "Okay," she asked. "Okay," I said. By the time we returned to the tender dock, the island heat had become persuasive. Back on board, the ship felt cool enough to lend us patience again. We showered the road dust from our ankles and let the air conditioning erase the shape of the sun from our shoulders. A card waited on the console table. Private dining request confirmed, Orion Veranda 7:00 p.m. Raphael had arranged candles in small glass cups that wouldn't mind a breeze. He'd also found napkins the color of sky and folded them into tidy arguments. Daniel arrived with the children just before 7, holding a florist's paper cone that clearly hadn't been meant for the sea. Inside were 3 stems of something white and local blooms clustered like soft ideas. For the table, he said, offering them to me. He wore a shirt without a tie and the kind of expression that knows dinner can be peace if people agree to that. Serena came a minute later, careful but present. She carried a small package wrapped in travel paper printed with compass roses. A token, she said, passing it to me with both hands. Inside was a vase from a shop with a window full of windmills, white clay painted with a single precise blue ring. Nothing ornate. It fit in my palm and felt like it knew the point of a table. "Thank you," I said. "You're welcome," Serena replied. Her voice didn't pitch up at the end. Raphael appeared with plates he announced quietly as if recital titles. Grilled fish bright with lemon lamb that had said yes to time a salad where the cucumbers made themselves essential. He poured a little wine and left us to negotiate conversation without an audience. Zoe declared a moratorium on the words schedule and structure, and then broke her own rule to tell Hannah what Nikos had said about exposing for whites. Max asked if the ship's horn had a note and whether anyone was allowed to hear it up close. Daniel talked about a church in Taormina with a clock that told the day with pictures instead of numbers. Serena listened and folded her napkin once, then left it alone. Midway through the meal, Daniel set down his fork and breathed in as if to make space. "I owe a thing," he said. Everyone looked up. "Mom, I'm sorry. For the call in my kitchen. For how I let this week be decided before it began. For the years that got tidy instead of generous." Zoe stared at her water glass like a witness. Max's hands were flat on either side of his plate as if the table needed holding still. "Thank you," I said. Daniel nodded. He turned toward Hannah. "And you he started, then restarted. You're good at making room. I haven't said that out loud enough." Hannah's mouth tilted. It was not a smile, and then it was. Serena's gaze stayed on the table for a moment longer than comfortable. Then she looked up. "I have made this week harder than it had to be," she said. "I know I'm not easy when I feel displaced." The word landed with care. "I am working on that. No flourish, no arguments in the margins." Zoe let out a breath she'd been keeping. Max reached absent-mindedly for a roll and tore it into 2 even halves in unintentional ceremony. Raphael reappeared with dessert that made the children's faces organize themselves toward joy. He poured coffee for the adults and retreated again. The candles layered their small warmth against the sea breeze. The ship gave a little the way a person gives when listening. After plates were moved aside and the conversation loosened, Zoe asked if she could show the silhouette photo from the morning. She placed her phone on the table and slid the image to the center with a fingertip. The 4 of us stood against the light, Hannah's hair. A line my shoulder a slope, Max shorter in the middle, the horizon patient behind. "We look like punctuation," Max said. "Good punctuation. Good." "Keep that one," Daniel told Zoe. "I already did," she said. The sky darkened along its edges and then in its middle. Lights climbed the cliffside behind us as the island found its own version of stars. The ship's wake drew a chalk line the moon could read. The children yawned and attempted to deny it. Hannah rescued them with the pretense of a card trick she had just invented. Serena watched and held her cup with both hands. Daniel leaned on the rail and looked out at a dark that wasn't empty. When it was time to say goodnight, the parting happened without speeches. Zoe hugged me in a way that kept a careful grip as if the ship might move mid-embrace. Max pressed his forehead to my shoulder for one beat and then sprang back to practicality. Hannah kissed their heads and told them to go brush their teeth like pirates. Daniel touched my elbow, then let go. After the door closed and the suite softened into its own shape again, I stepped onto the veranda. The caldera curved behind us, the island lights already sliding out of alignment with our motion. The little vase Serena had given me sat on the table with the white flowers arranging themselves as if they had thoughts about angles. I set the silhouette photo beside it and watched the 2 artifacts decide how to be near each other. The sea kept doing its work. The ship kept doing its work. The night joined them. I stood there long enough for the wind to thread my sleeves, and for the candles to shorten, and for the sound of water to become the room's own idea of quiet. When I went inside, I left the balcony door a hand's width open so the air could keep speaking in a voice we had learned to hear. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.